Nothing will crush a real estate investor's spirit like landlord stress. The difference between being successful and miserable in managing properties is education. Welcome to Landlord University, where landlords learn. Landlord University is recorded from inside the RentPrep office, where Stephen White and Jeff Pearson share the lessons learned from working with some of the most successful landlords.
Welcome to Landlord University in the News. I'm Jeff Pearson. I'm here with my co-host, Stephen White. Hello, Stephen. How are you doing?
Good, Jeff. Always happy to be back. And I was just telling you before we started recording, the feedback's been great. So I just want to encourage anybody who listens, if you have a suggestion for the show or want to reach out and tell your story. We've been getting a lot of that lately. People who are fans of Landlord University. It's always great to hear from people who listen and apply some of the knowledge that we're sharing. So feel free to reach out anytime, steve@rentprep.com.
Well, actually, we have our new email address, landlordu@rentprep.com. We can use that one.
Very true. I would actually prefer that one. landlordu@rentprep.com. You're absolutely right. And anything, drop us a line. Let us know what you think, suggestions, feedback. Like I said, I just got one earlier today that just said, love listening to the show. It's helped me through, the past couple of months on their first deal. So that was really exciting to hear. And of course, we always love to hear if we're making any kind of an impact.
Yes. And, while we're on the topic, it's always really helpful for any podcaster, if you're listening and you like the show, go to iTunes and rate and leave a review. It's a positive thing for us. It helps with all of the analytics and getting our name at the top of lists at different stages in the podcast's life cycle. So definitely, if you like the show, please go to iTunes, give us a great rating and a great review. We'd love to see that.
Yeah, great point. And so without any further ado, we've got Jennifer on the line for a episode of In the News, and that was one of the things that somebody had mentioned. They love hearing recent news stories and just different things that are happening with landlords around the country, and it's become a really popular segment. So I'm excited to hear what Jennifer's got for us today.
Hello, Jennifer.
Well, hello. Thanks. I'm happy to hear that positive feedback. I'd just like to remind any listeners, if there's landlord news happening in your area, send us a link because I'd love to look into that and cover it.
Yeah.
Our first story this week comes from Indiana. A few weeks ago, an Indiana woman was arrested for stealing appliances from her former landlord. The landlord actually discovered that there was a missing washer, dryer, refrigerator, and range after he evicted her. Now, he contacted her about these missing items, but she repeatedly claimed that there were no appliances when she moved in the apartment, and therefore she was not responsible for them, at all, because she claims they weren't there. Well, this landlord called the police, and they tracked her down at her new place. The police discovered that the appliances there perfectly matched those missing ones, and they returned the property to the landlord and arrested the former tenant. And at the time, she then stated that she was so angry about getting evicted that she retaliated by taking the appliances. Now, I pulled this story so that you guys could talk about what the landlord did right here to get that property returned.
Right. Well, the first thing the landlord did right is not act purely on emotion, which I think everybody's instinct would be to go find that person, get your stuff back, confront them. I think the landlord, got the police involved at the right time, let due process take its course, let them look into it and perform an investigation. And, I think that was absolutely the right way to handle it, rather than, flying off the handle, showing up at her house, or confronting her in any kind of way to try and get the appliances back.
In addition to that, you always have to think, when you're putting your lease agreement together, what information are you including? Now, a range, we're going to assume, most of us would assume that the range is there and that it's a part of the rental. But when it comes to the washer and dryer and the refrigerator, those things need to be called out separately on your lease agreement, so that there isn't a question of, well, those weren't there. I brought my own in. Well, if it's not on the lease agreement, there's no clarity there, unless you've got pictures and things like that. But I would say, if you have anything like that that's removable, and I would, in this day and age, include the dishwasher and the range, and any appliance that you have, list it on the lease agreement and have them initial next to it. Yes, these things are all there. And again, especially if it's a refrigerator or a washer and dryer, if somebody's there for 3, 4, 5 years, there's always a possibility they truly forget that this wasn't theirs. I mean, it's a little far-fetched, but it could happen. And so I would say make sure that you document all of that stuff and preferably have pictures. Take pictures, put it in your Google Drive, then you have a record of it.
Yeah, and sort of a similar story that I've heard recently, which I got a lot of humor out of it, was a tenant who decided he wanted to earn some extra income and removed all the copper pipes from the unit and and tried to salvage or resell them or whatever they do. They turn them into the scrapyard and get money for them. Well, he tried initially to be a good guy, and what he did was he took all the copper pipes out of the unit and replaced them with PVC pipes.
Oh, that
Thinking,
was nice of him.
yeah, thinking I don't want to just I just want to be a thief, and so he tried doing the right thing. Well, turns out within days, I think it was, he didn't do the plumbing correctly. They had major plumbing problems. I think it was a neighbor maybe in a downstairs unit that ended up reporting that there was leaks, and so they problem and luckily they were able to retrieve the stolen material. Believe it or not,
Wow.
they worked with the police department. The police department were able to actually get the pipes back. So before they melted them down or whatever, I guess the police went to the salvage yard and explained the situation. So that kind of had a better ending for the landlord, even though the landlord still ended up having to pay a plumber to go back in and reinstall and do everything correctly. But
Yeah.
I don't think it's always just limited to the appliances. I think I hear horror stories a lot of, plumbing things, fixtures, anything sometimes that somebody can get their hands on. So again, the importance, like you said, Jeff, documenting, taking pictures, and in cases where it's not something obvious like a dryer that you think they're going to steal, if it's something like a fixture or, piece of plumbing or something like that, get the police involved right away. I mean, it's
Yes.
theft. So don't try and resolve it on your own and think that somebody's going to do the right thing and replace the stuff. It's probably not going to happen.
Mm-hmm. And depending on the level of fixtures you have, I didn't even think about it until you mentioned it, but you could have a nice chandelier, some nice light fixtures in different rooms. Take pictures of those things and preferably do a walkthrough with a video with the tenant and video that stuff as you're doing the walkthrough and say, okay, all of these things are here, and you have video evidence as well. Obviously, we're not going to be seeing people steal light fixtures that often, but it certainly could happen. And if you don't have documentation, then you're in a tougher position. If you have to go to the police and say, my tenant moved out and they took all of my light fixtures, they're going to look at you a little bit funny. But if you say, here are the light fixtures, in fact, here are all the receipts and the pictures of them and the walkthrough I did with that person before they moved in, then you're in a pretty good position to have the police do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have
Absolutely.
that documentation, they're just going to look at you and say, well, what can we do? What
Right.
really did you have there, and what can we do?
Right. And I think in this case, they were lucky also to have found the appliances, that they weren't pawned or resold. And,
Yeah.
it really worked out well for the landlord. She gets her appliances back, let the court take care of the previous tenant. She doesn't have to, be involved in that or worry about getting her things back. So good one, Jennifer. It's got a happy ending. I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, one thing I did want to point out too, that I'm going to shamelessly plug our blog on RentPrep. Last week, we wrote up an article about an appliance guide for landlords, and that was talking about having documentation, as Jeff mentioned. Get specifics. You can write down the serial numbers and descriptions. It has a 2-inch white scratch on the side. Those sorts of things. Appliance guide also helps you keep track of repairs and maintenance and purchase and warranties and things like that. But if you have that document with that detailed description of your appliances in each of your rental units, that is the type of thing that you could walk into the police station and say, boom, here's the appliances that are missing. These should help, with your investigation. So I'd encourage landlords to take a look at that article that we put up and incorporate that as a good lesson from this landlord.
Absolutely. Good. Excellent point.
Yeah.
And what was the actual name of that article? It was Appliance Guide for
Appliance
Landlords,
Guide
right?
for
Yep,
Landlords. Yep.
gotcha.
Hmm.
It's just
Well, you know,
sweet and simple.
Yeah.
going back to this whole document everything, and I know this is something we always come back to, but if a landlord documents everything, their life is going to be so much better. So that's why it's a constant refrain from us. But when it comes to receipts, take a picture of or scan your receipts with your phone and upload those into your Google Drive. Because if you do spend $300 on a light fixture and you have a copy of that receipt and you have a picture of that all together, and you can come back to it, you don't have to go through your filing cabinet and find it. It's just there. You could be on vacation and send that report to the police department, send them copies of the receipts, copies of the pictures. It makes it really simple. Well, Jennifer, we have another fun article, so tell us a little bit about this one.
Sure. This article comes out of Wisconsin. The Wisconsin Supreme Court recently ruled in a case where a landlord was actually not responsible for his tenant's dogs and the injuries that they caused to a visitor to that property. What happened was the property owner was renting out a home to his daughter, and his daughter owned these dogs. A visitor to that property was attacked and was bitten 11 times.
Mm.
Now, we've seen this frequently in courts where they rule that the landlord is liable, and that's what happened in the lower courts here in Wisconsin. They did rule that the landlord was liable for that lawsuit that the victim filed. However, the state Supreme Court overturned that, saying that because he didn't live on the property, he didn't interact with the dogs, he didn't care for the dogs in any way, that he was not liable. And I was really excited to read this because I think this could be a real turning point for landlords in similar dog bite and dog injury cases nationwide.
I agree. I think this is a big deal. It's a small article, but what an impact it has. Like you said, this can help turn the tides. In a lot of cases where the landlord, I think, for me, it's common sense. If the landlord's not there, the landlord can't have any control over that situation other than saying, I just don't allow pets. Um, but I love the ruling. I love the fact that they kept pushing for it and they ended up getting it overturned, and they finally ruled in the landlord's favor that he didn't have, he wasn't liable in this case.
Yeah, it's funny, Steve. I was thinking the same thing. This is a short article. We're looking at essentially four small paragraphs, a one sentence lead in, and four very short one or two sentence paragraphs. But there is so much information in this. It's really interesting. Yeah, first of all, we have to go back to the real details of the case. So, this gentleman owned the property, and as Jennifer said, he rented the property to his daughter. Now, the Supreme Court took into account in their decision the fact that he didn't have any ownership responsibilities of the dog, which means the way they described it, he didn't live there, he didn't feed the dog, he didn't have any direct responsibility for the dog. And as a result, he wasn't liable. He was renting the property to his daughter, and that was it. Now, what I take from that is if you have somebody who is a landlord who is living in the property and has constant interaction with the dog, it might not be so clear cut.
Hmm.
So if
Right.
you're renting a room to someone and they have a dog and you feed that dog or you give it commands, get off the furniture, whatever it is, they might interpret that a little bit differently. So right now we can be confident, at least in Wisconsin, that the Supreme Court is saying if you rent a property to someone else and you don't live there and you don't have interaction with their dog, you're not going to be directly responsible. So then another tangent we can take this on is all of these insurance companies or landlords who have been preventing people from having certain types of dogs, certain breeds of dogs. And pit bulls are the big one that people seem to talk about. But the landlords might not have as much exposure to liability as a result of this ruling. Again, going back to Wisconsin, because that's where this ruling is from, it might open things up so that people don't have to be as concerned of, I'm going to get sued. But if you live there, if you have constant or regular interaction with that dog, I would be a little more hesitant. But in this case, if you're just renting your property, you don't live there, you don't go there that often, looks like it's going to be a much better situation.
Yeah, I think that our the case does a great job setting precedents, obviously, but sort of to dig in a little bit, also the issue had to have come up that it was his daughter,
Yes.
and I give the landlord a lot of credit because I'm sure at some point he had to provide proof or documentation that his daughter was in fact a tenant. So he must have done things correctly in the way that, it wasn't just his daughter or family living there. He had to have been organized in a way that showed she was a tenant, she's paying rent, and to make that separation, because that could have added a lot of complication to the case, saying, well, it's, she's related to you, it's your property. It's easy to sort of make that connection, but I think the landlord must have done a good enough job to say, listen, she's my tenant. Here's a clear line, a distinction. Here's what I've done to prove that she's, a legal tenant of mine, not just my daughter living in my property.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's something it would be interesting for us, Steve, to have a discussion with an attorney about this, because what if he just allowed his daughter to live there?
Yeah.
What documentation do you really need to have if you're just allowing somebody to live in your property? Because even if she's not paying rent, at the same time, she's a tenant on that property and she's subject to the same tenant laws, because if you want to evict her after you've let her live there, whether you live in the place or not, you have to go through the same legal process to evict her. So it's an interesting thing to think about. But I think you're right. He probably did have the proper documentation, some kind of a rental agreement or something like that.
I'm sure there's a double standard in there too, that, if that the eviction process is certainly going to be harder, but yet on the other hand, in situations like this, they might find, that might work against him, and he's got to, work that much harder to prove that she was a tenant or he had no responsibility towards it. So I'm sure, having the right insurances in place instead of just having a homeowner policy. Hopefully he had a landlord policy. All the pieces of the puzzle. I'm hoping in his case, and assuming from the outcome of the case, that he did have all those pieces correctly and have everything the way that he should have had.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. A friend was telling me just a couple of weeks ago about a friend of theirs who their daughter her boyfriend moved in and stayed with them for a little bit. And the boyfriend was a little bit sketchy, so they decided they wanted him to leave, and he didn't want to go. And so they're at a point where they have to go to court to get this kid evicted, who they were being generous. Yeah, you don't have a place to stay. You can go ahead and stay here. Well, we go back to the whole documentation situation. If somebody comes to live in your home for an extended period of time, you need to have an agreement with them. And you need to understand, if they stay there for more than the prescribed amount of time, and each community is different, but it's usually in that 4 to 6 week range, but they legally become a tenant, at which point you can't just say it's time for you to go. You can't put their stuff out on the curb. So then if we take it back to this particular situation, if they have a dog and they bring that dog into your house and you feed it, give it water, and act as if you're one of the owners, then you could subject yourself to liability for their dog if their dog bites somebody.
Great stuff.
Very much so. I think that brings us to the end of another episode. Stephen and Jennifer, thank you very much. Look forward to talking to you guys next week.
You're welcome.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening to Landlord University. And remember to visit rentprep.com/landlordu to see show notes and access free resources like forms and guides. And be sure to check out Jeff Pearson hosting his own hit podcast at thementorimpact.com.